Alrighty, today, folks, we are going to be harvesting this whole bed of garlic here because I've been running an experiment in it to find out what the best spacing is for growing garlic. And we're gonna go through all those results here today. These might be bigger than the other side. But first, to get started, what I need to do is go back 9 months to explain exactly what I did with this experiment. So back in October, I took a piece of string and I ran it right down the middle of this bed to split it in half to begin this experiment. Now on the right-hand side of the bed, what I decided to do was make a transplant hole every 6 inches. Now 6-inch spacing is very standard or traditional spacing for garlic, and as such, it's gonna kind of serve as our control in this experiment. But then on the left-hand side of the bed, what I decided to go with is what's called 7-inch off-centered spacing. And so what this means is that I made a little hole for a garlic clove every 7 inches. But after I had my rows, I came back through and added an additional row right in the middle of each of the 7-inch spaced rows. And this one in the middle is our off-centered row. And what it means is that each of these garlic cloves has about 3.5 inches between it. Now you might be wondering, why did I go with 7-inch spacing? That's a bit of an odd number to be going with, but that's because last year I ran a very similar experiment where I compared 6-inch spacing to 6-inch off-centered spacing. And in that experiment, the garlic that was planted at 6-inch intervals had an average weight of 52 grams per head. But then the garlic that was planted at 6-inch off-centered spacing had an average weight of only 41 grams per head. But here's where it gets really interesting, is because I was able to plant multiple additional rows with that off-centered spacing. So while the size was a little smaller, the total yield told a different story. See, on the 6-inch spacing side, I was able to plant 78 cloves of garlic, and that yielded a total of 4,056 grams of garlic. But then for the 6-inch off-centered spacing, I was able to plant 138 cloves of garlic. So while they were a little smaller, the total yield on this side increased to 5,658 grams of garlic. So it's for that reason that I went with the 7-inch off-centered spacing for this year, to see if that little extra bit of space allows it to have enough room to grow just as large as those with 6-inch spacing. Now I'm about to start harvesting these beds, but just to quickly touch on the last pieces of this experiment, once I had spaced them all out in the fall, I then put about 1 handful of worm castings into each one of the transplant holes to ensure that it had all the nutrients and microbes it needed to begin developing its roots through the winter. After that, I went ahead and planted the cloves, and I went with red Russian garlic, which is my absolute favorite variety of garlic. And the last thing that I did in the winter was I put about a 3 to 4 inch leaf mulch over top of them to help protect them from the coldest wintry days that we were going to come across through the winter. Now, as we fast forward into the spring, the garlic was about 4 or 5 inches tall in early March. And it was at that point that I went ahead and removed all of the leaf mulch to give them a big feed for the springtime here. And that consisted of applying 1 tablespoon of 4-4-4 organic fertilizer per square foot. And once I had worked that all around the bed so they were all well fed, I also put down 1 inch of fresh compost. And this compost is not only going to serve as a mulch similar to the leaves, but it's also got even more nutrients and microbial life in it for the garlic to put to use over the coming months. And from there, I allowed them to grow nice and big and strong all the way up until June, at which point the garlic scapes emerged. And at that point, I cut all of the garlic scapes off of the garlic so that all of the energy was just going back down into developing the heads beneath the surface, which is what they've been doing for the last month, as we're now in mid-July. And folks, it is time to start harvesting. 9 months of hard work, but this is what it's all about. Let's do it. Oh yeah, that's what we'd like to see. Yeah. That is a lot of garlic right there. Really good harvest. But now let's get to the left-hand side. These might be bigger than the other side. Alrighty, so now we need to get these on the scale. But to do so, we need to let them air dry for 14 days. And then we need to remove all of the necks and all of the roots so that we're only measuring the heads. So, seen 14 days and we're back. It's actually technically 18 days later, but I've been busy. The garden's been pumping out a lot of stuff the last few days. But now we are ready for the final weigh-in to find out which spacing option worked best for these two. So over the last 14 days, all that I've done is allowed the garlic to hang out in the garage and just air dry for that time. And then just a couple of minutes ago, I simply removed all of the necks on the garlic, as well as all of the roots and just the outer layer of paper that had a little bit of dirt on it. So now I've got all of my garlic from the 6-inch spacing all cleaned up, ready to be weighed, as well as all of the garlic from the 7-inch off-centered spacing. And so to get started, let's get the 6-inch spacing onto the scale. Alrighty, here we go. So first I'm gonna zero out the scale, and now let's start getting our 6-inch spacing garlic onto the scale. And as I do this, one thing to keep in mind for the very end of this video is that there are 37 heads of garlic that were at the 6-inch spacing. Alrighty, here we go. 1.463 kilograms of red Russian garlic. All right. Alrighty, so the first weight is in. Let's get these ones off the scale here. Now it's time for the finale, the 7-inch off-center spacing. Here we go. Now for the 7-inch spacing, keep in mind that for these, we have 53 heads of garlic, so the weight should be higher. We're going to chat about that in just a second. Let's get these on. Ooh, these are looking really good. Really happy with how these have grown. All right, moment of truth. 2.300 kilograms. Let's go. So there's only one thing that we have to figure out now, and that's just, was the average head for the 7-inch off-centered spacing the same size, smaller, or potentially even bigger than the garlic that we planted at 6-inch spacing? So I need my notepad for this. Getting started with the 6-inch spacing, the total weight came out to 1.464 kilograms, and that was across 37 heads of garlic, which comes out to an average per head of 39.56 grams per head of garlic. Now, let's move on to our 7-inch off-centered spacing. And for this one, remember, our total weight came out to exactly 2.300 kilograms, and that was across 53 heads of garlic. So, what was the average weight on these heads of garlic? Well, that comes out to 43.39 grams. So it actually wasn't smaller than the 6-inch spacing where they had more space. As a matter of fact, it was even a little bit bigger, which I don't know why that was the case just yet, but this is a really interesting, really cool learning from this experiment. Let me know what you're going to do with your garlic spacing for this upcoming season. Hope that this has been valuable and helpful for you, and I can't wait to catch you on the next video. See you then.